Article 312.8 of the National Electrical Code, or NEC, addresses the use of enclosures for splices and taps, which effectively includes pull boxes. This section outlines the conditions under which enclosures such as panel boards and disconnects can be used for pulling conductors and making connections. It is crucial to examine this article to understand the specific requirements related to conductor fill, size of the enclosure, and separation of voltage systems. When considering using a panel board or disconnect as a pull box, it is imperative to ensure that the enclosure is adequately sized for the number and size of conductors being installed. The NEC provides specific guidelines on conductor fill, dictating the maximum percentage of the enclosure's cross-sectional area that can be occupied by conductors. This is to prevent overcrowding, which can lead to overheating and potential insulation damage. Furthermore, the enclosure must be of sufficient depth and width to allow for proper bending radii of the conductors. Conductors must not be bent too sharply, as this can damage the insulation and increase the risk of electrical faults. NEC Article 312.6 provides details on minimum bending space requirements for conductors and enclosures. In addition to conductor fill and bending space, the NEC also addresses the separation of voltage systems within enclosures. If circuits of different voltage levels are present in the same enclosure, they must be physically separated by barriers or partitions. This is to prevent accidental contact between circuits, which could result in electrical shock or equipment damage. Article 408.3d specifically addresses panel boards and their suitability for use as pull boxes. This section emphasizes the importance of maintaining proper separation of circuits with different voltage characteristics. Panel boards are designed primarily for distribution of power and overcurrent protection. Using them as pull boxes may compromise their intended function if not done in accordance with the code. It's essential to ensure that any additional conductors or splices within the panel board do not interfere with the operation of the breakers or other protective devices. Also, the added heat from these additional conductors should be considered. Article 409.2 pertains to disconnects, which are primarily intended to isolate electrical equipment for maintenance or safety purposes. Using a disconnect enclosure as a pull box requires careful consideration. The disconnect's primary function should not be impaired by additional conductors or splices. Furthermore, the enclosure must be adequately sized to accommodate both the disconnect components and the additional conductors while still meeting the conductor fill and bending space requirements of the NEC. When evaluating whether a panel board or disconnect can be used as a pull box for circuits of a different voltage or source, it is critical to consider the following factors. Firstly, the available space within the enclosure must be sufficient to accommodate the additional conductors and any necessary splices, while still adhering to the conductor fill requirements outlined in the NEC. Secondly, the bending radii of the conductors must be maintained to prevent insulation damage and ensure reliable operation. Thirdly, if circuits of different voltage levels are present, they must be physically separated by barriers or partitions to prevent accidental contact. Fourthly, the primary function of the panel board or disconnect must not be compromised by the addition of conductors or splices. Fifthly, any applicable listing or labeling requirements for the equipment must be followed. Manufacturers often provide specific instructions on the proper installation and use of their equipment, and these instructions should be carefully reviewed and adhered to. Sixthly, local amendments to the NEC may exist, and it is essential to be aware of and comply with these local regulations. Local jurisdictions may have more stringent requirements than the NEC, and these requirements must be followed to ensure code compliance. Seventhly, consider the heat generated by the conductors. Overcrowding can lead to excessive heat, which can degrade the insulation and reduce the lifespan of the equipment. Proper ventilation and conductor sizing are crucial to manage heat effectively. Eighthly, ensure that all connections are made properly and securely. Loose connections can cause arcing and overheating, which can lead to electrical fires. Torque all connections to the manufacturer's specifications. Ninthly, label all conductors clearly to avoid confusion during future maintenance or troubleshooting. Proper labeling can prevent accidental contact with energized circuits and improve safety. Tenthly, perform a thorough inspection of the installation to ensure that all requirements have been met. This inspection should include a visual examination of the enclosure, conductors, and connections, as well as electrical testing to verify proper operation. If the panel board or disconnect is deemed unsuitable for use as a pull box, alternative solutions should be considered. Separate pull boxes can be installed to provide the necessary space for pulling conductors and making connections. These pull boxes should be sized and installed in accordance with the NEC requirements. Alternatively, larger enclosures can be used for the panel board or disconnect, providing ample space for both the primary equipment and the additional conductors. In summary, the NEC provides specific guidelines on the use of enclosures as pull boxes, including panel boards and disconnects. It is essential to carefully review and comply with these guidelines to ensure safe and code-compliant installations. Factors such as conductor fill, bending space, separation of voltage systems, and listing requirements must be considered. If the panel board or disconnect is not suitable for use as a pull box, alternative solutions should be implemented. Article 312.8 addresses the use of enclosures for splices and taps, including their use as pull boxes, focusing on conductor fill, sizing, and voltage separation. Article 408.3d specifically addresses panel boards, emphasizing the need to maintain proper separation of circuits with different voltage characteristics. Panel boards are mainly for power distribution and overcurrent protection, so using them as pull boxes can compromise their function if not done correctly. Article 409.2 covers disconnects, primarily for isolating equipment for maintenance or safety. If a disconnect enclosure is used as a pull box, it should not impair the disconnect's function, and the enclosure must be large enough to accommodate both the disconnect components and additional conductors. Factors to consider include sufficient space for conductors and splices, maintaining conductor bending radii, physical separation of different voltage levels, not compromising the primary function of the equipment, following listing and labeling requirements, adhering to local amendments, managing heat generation, ensuring secure connections, labeling conductors clearly, and performing thorough inspections. Alternatives to using panel boards or disconnects as pull boxes include installing separate pull boxes or using larger enclosures for the panel board or disconnect. The NEC provides guidelines to ensure safe and code-compliant electrical installations.